today is driven by fear. Fear is a powerful emotion. It's the chink in your armor that the enemy uses to control you. The Apostle John wrote that the whole world lies in the sway of the wicked one, who, with the World Wide Web at his disposal, now has a distribution network like never in history. So many different voices with twisted truth, designed to keep you off balance and driving you to learn more and more. Is it bringing you peace? Are you weary? Are you finding it harder to be still and to hear the still small voice of the one who loves you? So grab your favorite beverage, find a quiet place, and join Banner Kid for the Love is Calling podcast. Let's focus on Jesus, the lover of our souls.
All right, thank you, JB. Welcome to the Daily Good News. This is Banner, and I appreciate you joining me. We're going to be jumping back into the book of Mark this evening, and I just want to say a couple of things here. Number one, we are experiencing a real tragedy here in our neck of the woods here in the Tri-County area of DeKalb, Noble, and LaGrange, and just a tough situation, children dead. We don't know the real story behind everything yet. We're still waiting to hear the final autopsy report and things, but it appears that it wasn't natural, and it was a very sad thing. You know, we're living in a day and age when people feel desperate, and there's a lot that people have to deal with every day. You know, we've talked about some of those things, and mental illness is a real thing, and it appears that very likely could be behind what caused the death of 3 little children and their mama. And I just want to ask you, be in prayer for that family, and that they would be able to find peace, and be in prayer for our world, and particularly our community, and for those of us who are called to be leaders in the church and pastors, that we might be able to give comfort, that we might be able to speak truth, and that people might find the sound mind that comes from a relationship with Christ Jesus through us and through you. We're all in this together. Just a sad thing, so encourage you with that. We're going to pick up in verse 22 of Mark chapter 8, and listen to this story. Speaking of Jesus, it says, "Then he came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of town. When he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked if he saw anything." Well, that's kind of strange, isn't it? He spit on his eyes. Don't ask me to explain why. I can't. But that's what the story tells us. And it says, so he took him after he had spit on his eyes, put his hands on him, and he asked him if he saw anything. And then he looked up and said, this man said, "I see men like trees walking." So he wasn't able to see very clearly. He saw just outlines, it sounds like, just the shape of people. And then in verse 25 it says of Jesus, "Then he put his hands on the man's eyes again and made him look up. And he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Then he sent him away to his house, saying, 'Neither go into the town, nor tell anyone in the town.'" And it's interesting. I know there was a time when Jesus went to his home country, and the Bible tells us he couldn't do many miracles there because of unbelief. And so it seems like there were some maybe limitations, if you want to put a word to it, before his death, resurrection, and ascension. And I don't completely understand that. But the other thing that comes to my mind is this, and it's that the process that we're in our walk with Christ, a lot of times we begin to see some things, but we can't see it clearly. You know, the Lord begins to open our eyes a little bit to truth, but we're seeing through the filter of the baggage of tradition, of things other people have told us. We're struggling to get through the gaslighting of confusion to be able to see the absolute truth. But as we continue to turn to Jesus, as we continue to allow him to put his hands on our spiritual eyes and to completely heal us and make everything clear, then eventually we're going to see it. And I'd encourage you to meditate on that. And now let's move into verse 27. In verse 27, it says, "Now Jesus and his disciples went out to the towns of Caesarea Philippi. And on the road, he asked his disciples, saying to them, 'Who do men say that I am?' And so they answered, 'John the Baptist, but some say Elijah, and others, one of the prophets.' He said to them, 'But who do you say that I am?' Peter answered and said to him, 'You're the Christ.' Then he strictly warned them that they should tell no one about him." Now, again, Mark doesn't give a lot of the detail that we find in the other Gospels, so we're going to move over to Matthew chapter 16 and read that same story from Matthew's perspective, where he adds more of what happened at that time, more detail. Listen to this. Matthew 16:13, "When Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, 'Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?' And so they said, 'Some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets.' He said to them, 'But who do you say that I am?' Simon Peter answered and said, 'You are the Christ, the Son of the living God.' And Jesus answered and said to him in verse 17, 'Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah,'" that means Simon, son of Jonah, "'for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you're Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." So let's look at that a little closer, because it does give us some more detail. And so he tells Peter, Simon Bar-Jonah, Simon the son of Jonah, says, "Flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." Now remember that God is spirit. And as spirit, he manifested himself as the Father through being the one who, for lack of a better word, impregnated Mary that Jesus might be born, being the Father of Jesus. And therefore our Father, when we come to him, when we come to Jesus in faith and we're born again into the family of God and become co-heirs with Christ. So it is the Spirit of God, the Father, who revealed to Peter who Jesus Christ really was, that he is the Son of God. And then he says, "I say to you that you're Peter." So there's a mutual introduction happening here. "I know you, Peter." And he says, "And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. And I'll give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Now, this is used by the Roman Catholic Church as proof text that Peter was essentially the first pope. And they look at the words that are in Matthew 16, verse 18, for Peter. Peter is the word Petros, and it means rock. And on this rock, the word rock in the Greek is likewise Petros, and says, "I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." They add to that, the keys to the kingdom of heaven have been given, and the binding and the loosing. If you bind on earth, it will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And they're saying that's the papal authority. And that's interesting that they say that, because we don't see anywhere in the scriptures that validate that. As a matter of fact, when we look at the times that the council was mentioned, for instance, in Acts chapter 15, the one who had the preponderance of the decision-making that was passed on to the Gentiles in the letter that was circulated was James, who is the half-brother of Jesus. And then in other places we see Peter and James mentioned, but James is mentioned in a way that almost sounds as if he has the, maybe for lack of a better word, the priority in the situation. I believe, though, if we talk to Peter, he'd say, "What do you mean, me being the first pope?" No, because I believe what he's saying is when he says, I say to you that you're Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, he's not saying it's Peter. He's saying the answer, Peter's answer, when he said, you are the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one, the Son of the living God. And on that truth, Jesus is going to build his church. He's building his church on the fact that he is the promised one, the anointed one, the prophet foretold. He is the Son of the living God, the Messiah foretold. And on the truth of that, he is building his church. You know, in Acts, it tells us that he will rebuild the fallen tent of David, or the fallen tabernacle of David. He's talking about Jesus Christ. We're reading this and understanding that it's Jesus that the church is built on. It's him that builds the church. He says very clearly in this, he says, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. That's me and you, brothers and sisters. I encourage you to look at this and understand that, because Jesus is still asking, the Spirit of God is still asking that same question to me and you today, and to many people, everyone really. Who do you say that he is? Who is Jesus to you? Is he just a nice guy and a prophet? Is that all he is? Is he just a guy that was sent from God, and he died and saved us by his death and resurrection and ascension, that we go to heaven, but then his work is done? And we have salvation, and therefore we're on autopilot, and one day we'll go to be with him, but meantime we just live our lives and do whatever? Who do you say Jesus is? I'm not going to answer the question for you. I'm going to ask you to ask God to help you see. Ask the Spirit to help you see and to know who Jesus Christ really is, who he is to you, what he means to you, what he means for us as born-again people in the kingdom of God. I ask you to think about that till I talk with you again on the Daily Good News. Have a blessed, blessed time in Jesus Christ.
If you've been encouraged by this podcast, please subscribe to Love is Calling and tell your friends to check it out. If you have any questions, email Banner at bannerkid.com. That's BANNER at BANNERKIDD.com. And join us for future episodes of Love is Calling as we continue to focus on Jesus, the lover of our souls.